Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jimmy Wallace here. Um, we have our final Q&A Zoom meeting today, and want to thank you all for being part of the course and being part of today's final meeting. I hope you've all enjoyed the class up to date, and after we're all said and done, certainly really enjoy hearing about your feedback with the course and how possibly that it could be improved, because we're always looking to improve it. I've been part of the program for, I guess, about 7 years now, and it's changed quite a bit. And then, of course, we evolved into the PDC Pro program, and it's this whole Q&A is part of that, and it's been a very enjoyable addition for myself, and I think it's been valuable for most students that have been able to either chime in or watch the recordings of these meetings. So yeah, so it's been a great time. It's been a great class, and now we're on to our final assignment. And I thought today we would review the concept plan portion of the assignment, and then we'd take a look at anybody who wants some sort of off-the-cuff remarks about their project site and what I would see within it. And I think we've got Max here that has posted his site, so we'll take a look at his. And it has nothing to do with the your design itself. It's just perhaps what I see through my eyes with what I know of your project site. So it'll be an interesting exercise to go through, but we'll make sure we cover off all we need to do with regards to the assignment here. So let us take a look at that. I'm just going to share my screen, and if anybody has any questions, just pop them in the chat there. All right. So the local network survey is part of this assignment, and it's not a huge part of it, so I'm not really going to cover that. I don't think there's anything too mysterious with that. The concept plan is the biggie, and that has been basically all the work we've done up until this week has really brought us to this point where we can look at our existing project site and put some design elements with on that, to meet the goals of the design. So what we are going to do, so some of the components we definitely want to make sure we have in here that are part of the template file is we want to see your site plan, your base plan, what's existing. So when it says existing, that just means it's before, and in this case, pre-design. So as it sets right now, for those, I know Gabriel has a project site that doesn't have a house on it. So the exception to this would be placing some building footprint on that. That would be part of that existing plan where you plan to put your buildings. And then we want to see your concept. So this is the final design that we're putting together based on all of those previous assignments that we've done. We're going to factor in water and how you move through the site, some elements within that, and of course plants would be part of that. And we want to hear about your mission statement, the big picture that's driving the design and some of the goals. And then we're going to be looking at proposed zones that may or may not be a little bit different than where we started, and pathways And then a big part in my regard is the water management plan, and that's something my wife and myself, Angela, we put a lot of focus on this section. In fact, when we're doing a design, that is the first thing we're looking at is water assets and how we're going to utilize those. And then we're going to look at soil fertility and how that all gets phased in. So that's a very interesting thing all in itself is you can design, well, let's say you design the Taj Mahal, you got to figure out how to execute it and what is realistic in terms of phasing that in. So that is something that takes a little while to get a good handle on. So, you know, practicing on paper, so to speak, is a great way to start, as well as considering a budget. So if the project site you're working on is your own, that's important. If it's for somebody else, it's even more important. And again, this takes a little bit of time to get used to how to figure out pricing and budgets are really guesses, right? So when we do an installation, we do it for a fixed price, but really we're just guessing what that's going to be, and we're hoping we hit the mark, and we do. So, but that's from doing this for many, many years. You do get a better idea. So right at the start of one's design career, let's say, or design education, the budget this can be very hard. And it certainly was for me early in our career. And we just worked on a cost plus basis and it was agreed to with the clients that we would purchase materials. We'd have a markup on those materials, and then we charged our labor rate at a certain hourly and machine. We had machines at that time. So that's how we kind of navigated early in our career, and it was safe from one perspective. Safe in that we weren't going to get caught short, but it wasn't great in another perspective in that, we really weren't totally sure where costs were going to go, and that can be challenging, especially if you're having to present all this stuff to your clients and you think it's going to be one price and it gets creeping above that. So you learn, and certainly learned on that one, and hence doing the fixed price now. So we want to demonstrate at least 5 different principles and talk about social permaculture, and then a SWOT analysis at the end there. So those are sort of the guts of what we want to see within this final design assignment. And there are some resources here you can check out that might be helpful if you're wondering about mission statements or about goals. These are all some really good resources on this page here that you can definitely look at. And then the rubric, of course, is here. And as you can see, it's 22 points, and out of that, only 4 go to the network survey. So obviously, the concept plan has a greater weight put on it. Yeah, so there are many examples I can show you today. Perhaps we'll look at a couple. Let's see here. Sorry, I usually have these all set up. Just grab a couple here. I'll get a couple that aren't available to you at the moment. They're from previous students, but they haven't been put on the spread or on the template file yet. All right, here is one. There we go. So as you can see, uh, this is a fairly small urban site. And let us go down to our concept plan. Yeah, so with this student, what she did, she had a tricky site actually. It was long and narrow and had a creek running through it, and then quite a bit of her property wasn't easily accessible. So this was all forested, and of course, you're not gonna. She had no intention of doing anything there design-wise, but was focused on near the house and improving that. So this was her concept plan, and she did a really nice job of laying all of this out, and the labeling is quite clear. So that made it easy. Uh, oh, sorry about that. So an interesting approach here that she did was she split this up into earthworks, soil fertility, water, vegetation, and structure, and had different colored labels for that. So that was a creative way of showing those. And that's one thing I really enjoy about being involved with the course is you get to see what other people do, not only their ideas, but their presentation. So it's wonderful. So this is an interesting way of doing that. And then we had some concept details, which is a good idea. Give people a bit deeper idea of what the intent is here. And looking at water and soil here. So with rainwater collection, improving soil holding, water holding capacity within the soils. So just some really nice graphics and some good ideas here. So she was also trying to get some of the invasives out of her forest, which can be tricky for sure, especially ivy. That's a really tough one to get rid of. And then phasing and budget here. And just do your best with this. And but it is a good exercise to go through. And for those who want to do more design after this course, this is pretty critical to get a good grasp of. And we're not here to, the course isn't about phasing and budgeting projects. Perhaps that's another course down the road. But this just gives you a touch of, because you do need to give your clients an idea. They can love what you've got on paper here, but inevitably they're going to ask, well, how much is that going to cost? And presumably, in a perfect world, you've designed this with that in mind, right? And then a little bit about permaculture principles. Again, another creative way of putting that together, and then a SWOT analysis here. So that is one example. Let's look at one more, and then I can show you what my company, my wife and myself, what we provide, which will be similar but different. Okay, so this is an acreage property, and I'm sure you have seen portions of this in previous videos. Just wait till this loads up. There we go. So this is a 5-acre site, and from what I recall, it's pretty open. There's some contours here, which is great. And then there's some indication of a couple of the contours. So this does slope down to this bottom corner, and there's a pond here. So again, there's the existing. And then the concept plan, which was interesting. I really like hedgerows. I think they're a fantastic addition. I think the only critique here would just be access, making sure that you can easily access, go from one section to another. I don't think that's perhaps been factored in here. It probably would be if when it was being put together, dividing these paddocks up. I think that was her intent. And then a kitchen garden and an ornamental garden near the house. And then we're looking at zones, at pathways. So it's interesting to see how this compares to the existing zones. Often it does shift a little bit. And then water management, what the plan is for that. And then a little bit more on water management. So you can see here, she's trying to collect some water. So with off the main house, they had clay tile, which is good to collect off of. Like not good in terms of the yield. Funny enough, it has a fairly low coefficient factor, but it doesn't have a lot of harmful chemicals, such as the asphalt shingle. So collecting off asphalt shingle, don't usually recommend using that on annual vegetable crops. And then some inspirational images here. And then talks about soil fertility. So this is a great idea, using chickens to improve the quality of the soil. And we have done that. We have a chicken tractor that we, for a number of years, used. We haven't used it this year. But they do an amazing, have an amazing impact on the ground. So a lot of positive things to look at that. And so that's an easy way of improving pasture, putting animals on them, provided they're not impacting it too heavily, and you give it a little time to rest. So a little bit about soil building here, and then the vegetation plan. And this is an interesting little food garden. There's an orchard, and then beside it, more annual veg. And this particular student had a lot of small beds, and then I tried to encourage her to go with some longer ones. So she did that with some of them. So that's great. Um, and the only reason that's great is it'll just be a lot more productive per square foot for her and easier to manage. And then some details here on the vegetation. And again, phasing, budgeting. And this was a 4-year plan. And then again, we go look at permaculture principles and that social permaculture, and then SWOT analysis here. So those are a couple of student examples. What I will do, just bring up a couple of sorry, I'm just trying to find one here that's gonna, all right. Well, stop our share. Okay, so here is an urban project we designed, I think it was last year, for a couple, and they wanted to improve their food security. So again, what we do is completely different, and well, not completely. We do not have a template file such as you do, and so what we do is we put together a sector analysis or sector compass or sector map. And then after that, we will do a water layer. So this is our water layer. And then we will do what we call access, right? So it's hard elements basically within the landscape. And then we do a soil layer, and all of those overlay and make up the concept. So this is basically the concept for this property here. I'm not sure why that has red around it. But that's how we look at this. So we were looking at the big picture in terms of the watershed, the micro watershed. They have with their micro watershed, the neighboring property definitely impacts theirs. So we're going to pick that up with a little swale. And they have a rain garden and collecting water as well. And then again, that is a access layer, and then this is all bringing it together into that concept. Now we go further with that, and we start getting into details, exactly what plants we're going to use, as well as details on all the hard surface, the little outdoor kitchen and patio surface, and a fire pit there. And then we have a small rain garden and a little trail. Well, basically a swale trail here, just some access through this planting that's wood chip filled. So that is an example of an urban. Let me try and get an acreage one here for you. All right. So this is slightly different. I have these I don't have the sheets quite set up the way I should here. Okay. With this particular project, we're looking at the water layer here. And this is a acreage project where they wanted to collect water off of an outbuilding. And we put that into some storage. We had to do a little pump chamber to get it to storage here. And then there is a small greenhouse. And the homeowner wanted all these cisterns to be covered in a little building. And then we're just showing the basics with the collection, the type of tanks, and some of the direction of the piping and where that would go. And then some options here where we could increase storage or increase collection, collecting off the house roof and pumping to the storage over here, which is probably something they'll have to do based on the amount of water they're using at the moment. And then we have a little water budget tool where we have our average annual rainfall broken up, and then we figure out the potential collection based on that and what our usage is. And then this is the nice part is we get this month-end tank balance so we can see where we're going to run out of water and where we'll have to supplement. And that's what we use when we're sizing a rainwater collection system, because otherwise you just have no idea. Do you need one tank? And in this case, they're going with 12,000 gallons of collection, so that's 4 3,000-gallon cisterns, and they still end up having to supplement 63,000 liters, which in US gallons is that's a good question. Probably 24 or 5,000 gallons through the season. But this way we know what is going on, and it's too bad because the overflow, as you can see, almost makes up for that. But you just we're getting all of that rainfall during the wrong time of year, and it's like where I live. We have 15,000 gallons of storage, and I hold back about 6,000 for fire suppression if we ever need it. But we're already having to use makeup water, so we're already making up on our tanks with our annual, and this is just going to annual vegetable crops, and it's May, so um, we definitely see the need to have larger storage. And here's access. So the access in this particular project was just a permeable parking area, and then a little patio, not much there. And then it was, this is the soil layer. It's a lot of soft landscape. Some of it was existing and we were just renovating it, and others were new. This is a new planting here. This is a new planting, and all of this here is new as well. So, and then that all comes together. So this is the initial concept that we would present to a client, and then we get feedback and modify it. And this did get modified a little bit. And then afterwards, we look at some of the details. So I do have that I can quickly show you, and then we're going to take a look at something else here. Okay. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. So that was the concept that got modified, I believe, a little bit. And then this would be a planting plan that we do. So, ultimately, if you're doing any designs beyond this course and you want to get really specific, um, this is what we provide. And, we're lucky our software does a lot of the work for us here. And it ends up, we can generate a planting plan over here. And that's what we would send to a nursery for pricing, right? But that way, we know exactly what plant is going where. And this is actually when I started in the landscape industry, this was, I couldn't have done this. Um, I needed to do all my designs on site, my planting designs. So we would just get a whole bunch of plant material and sort of wing it on site. Um, but now done it enough, can visualize it on paper here. These are just a couple of other little beds that were detailed out. And this is this parking grid that was pretty crazy. It's an interesting product that you can basically put gravel or turf over, or in this case, it was going to be hydroseeding. So it would be seeded lawn, but you could drive on it. So it's not my first pick, but everybody, this isn't our landscape, so we're doing what our clients want, and infiltrating water back into the landscape. This is one way of doing it. So not a cheap way of doing it, but certainly one way. And then this was just a dimensions page that we printed out. So when we went to the site and started laying it out, so we'd basically take this with a paint gun and start painting out some of the perimeter. And then we had a machine with us who started to excavate all this out. And that's kind of a whole different gambit is the site work. But that's a bit of an idea of what we provide to our clients, and got lots of examples of those. Um, but yeah, let's take a peek at Max's project site here. Because that was one of the reasons that kind of opened this meeting up to look at other people's work or other people's project sites was prompted by Max here. Let's see. Okay. I'm having trouble with my one second here. Get rid of that. Sorry about that. We'll get her nailed here. There we are. Okay, so Max has a site and get rid of those. So I took a little bit of a look at it prior to the meeting, and what I did was I went through a little bit of the design site images here and what was going on the project site itself. And then a little snapshot of the climate. So a lot of rainfall. And I took a look at the base map here. So the focus is in and around these structures, even though the property boundary or project site boundary is much larger. A very interesting site. So I did that and then went through the client interview just briefly, just to see what the desire was, because that is, vital, of course, to figure out what people want to do. And so my takeaway was just increasing food reliance here and creating income from the property. So let's take a look. There's zone 1. All right, so I had a couple thoughts here, and actually I'm going to go on to another screen. So I brought it up in Google Earth. All right. So yeah, Max, my thoughts on this were collection off the barn roof here. I believe that's what this is. Yeah. So I would collect as much rainwater as possible off of that. And it would probably have to be in cisterns. So I don't see it easily happening with a pond.
So, in fact, I think,
There's great little potential here for annual cropping. Is that something
yeah.
that you saw
So,
there?
just to give you a little bit of an update from this image.
Oops, I can't hear you.
Oh,
Oh, here we go. No, now I can hear you.
okay, great. So just to give you a little update from this image, and what you can't see is yeah, that area near the greenhouse, that's being cultivated as a market garden right now.
Okay.
First attempts at such. And then the barn roof, in theory, those gutters drain to two downspouts, which go underground, and we can't find as-built or any indication of exactly where those go, but they seem to feed just beside that road there. On the west side of that road, there's a drainage ditch that runs right into that cluster of trees. Is a big group of willow that's hiding a pretty substantial pond. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think most of that barn is already draining into a pond right there.
Ah, okay.
Although those gutters are inefficient, and who knows what's happening underground with that downspout and such.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Um, is that pond large enough to draw water from?
Um, I in theory, I don't really know enough about that to know
Okay.
what the requirements would be. It has an outflow that drains. Trying to think. So to the east of the main house there, and just mirroring alongside the curve of the road, there's a culvert, and it drains out into a ditch, which follows that road until it comes to that kind of eye-shaped vegetation moat there.
Mm-hmm.
And that seasonally fills up as well.
Okay.
So in theory, you could drain water from it, but there's an outflow in such a way where it kind of just keeps water moving through the system.
Right. So, I mean, if it, if um, get my tool here going. So if you had, so you're saying there's a pond somewhere in here, or maybe
Just
it's
to
here?
the left, it's in on the left side of the road there. It's that cluster of trees. Yeah, that's the cluster of
Ah,
trees.
okay.
Those are big willows, and there's a nice pond in there.
So if there's something there, um, that's a great resource if it's holding water. And so that could be pulled from. You probably have pretty good producing wells on the site anyhow because of the high water table, I would think. So I
Yeah.
don't think water's a scarce item on the property. Um, One thing that popped up for me was this large, this about a hectare or 2.5 acre pasture here. And for me, I mean, every time I see this sort of thing, I just see it ultimately blending trees with it, right? So doing some sort of keyline agroforestry layout where there was trees and alleyways. Um,
Yeah, that's long term in the fantasy vision, kind of exactly where I've arrived to,
mm,
and potentially doing some sort of alley cropping, potentially. I mean, we've got sheep, but they're the complications of trying to like plant on scale, do tree plantings on scale and integrate sheep, and you potentially lose like 2 or 3 years through establishment. It's yeah, it requires a lot more planning than what I've put in right now.
right, right. Well, and of course, one if you're really drawn into the agricultural design end of things, do consider checking out the Agrarian platform. There's lots of free videos out there, and if you feel you want to take training that way, I mean, it's a remarkable platform and predominantly filled with farmers. Um, a few people like myself that are designers, but yeah, it's a fabulous resource. But that's one of the things that I could see here is just a blend of, again, that agroforestry blend where you have alleyways and permanent tree crop that, long term you're going to get your carbohydrates from, or, depending on what the trees are, right? Um, it could be, another way around it would be you could do some hedgerow along the edge here that was for fodder as well, right? So,
Yeah, we've arrived there as well, and we've kind of started to experiment and play around and just see, try to get better at tree planting. So on the northern tip, uh, that there's a certain length of fence that we removed, and that overgrown area closer to the creek, we hit that with sheep and a BCS, and we're starting to try to do pretty low stakes uh, native trees in there for fodder and biomass.
right on. Yeah, and I would say the only thing you'd want to be obviously careful there is just setback from that riparian and whatever that is. Every locality is going to have different, like where I live, you'd have to be 15 meters back from that. So that's what, kind of 50 feet where you couldn't, negatively impact that other than if the intent is to add native material, then they're gonna welcome that. But you would have to be mindful of that for sure. And I would say if this farm was on the agrarian platform and somebody was asking ideas on it, somebody like Darren Doherty often will look at a riparian and say, look, you should, consider enhancing that. So providing more of a buffer for the riparian just to bump up the ecological footprint. But there's not a lot of space here either. So that's, you know what I mean? Like you've got 2.5 acres of approximately of pasture, but there's probably There's some room for that. Um,
Yeah, and I mean there's other places on the property too that I mean that pasture just to the south on the other side of the road there, and then there's a large stretch of pasture to the north as well. And yeah, there's enough space to play around. But again, that question of scale, like the commitments that I/we are comfortable making at this point are just like plugging stuff in the riparian area and see if it grows, you know,
yeah, yeah.
or at least try to like figure out our systems and get efficient at, okay, if we're going to water 50 plants, 100 plants, whatever, are we going to drag hoses? Are we pumping water? Are we doing other stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want to be following it up for sure. Um, so yeah, that was my thoughts there. And you could look at, I'm gonna take this off of screen share and go back to, well, I don't know what's going on with my screen share today. Just a contour map creator, which we know isn't deadly accurate by any means, but it gives us a little idea of what's going on with this. Um, so, I guess the one thing that I would ask with this pasture is whether it's seasonally waterlogged or if there's issues getting onto it early in the year, and if such, is it something that you have to um, be mindful of? If you were planting alleyways here, would you do it in such a way that the water was draining to one side? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it a flip where you get too much water in the winter and then maybe there's not enough in the summer?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I mean, so you can kind of see along that tree line along the driveway in the shade of those trees, there's a low spot, little drainage ditch there, which I think drains probably roof water from the cottage as well as just, general runoff off the driveway and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And that area is, the first area to saturate, and it kind of, you know, the wet patch moves outward from there into the pasture. And then, yeah,
Ah,
in summer, it gets relatively dry.
yeah, yeah. So that, that's something we haven't covered in this course is keyline design. But that's something you may want to, travel down in terms of your training long term. And, it's all based on, it's harder in a small space, but it's, what it does is it just helps equalize water on a site. And it's not doing anything drastic in terms of above ground, but the tree layout would reflect that. Let me just see if there's something obvious I can.
And you still feel that like doing a key line centric layout is appropriate given the like super limited contour differential in that pasture.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we go, we'll see if I can get a picture here that um, this is pretty. This maybe not like this is a key line design of a larger space, but what jumps out at me when I see these when they're done well is that in time all the tree growth is even, and it's quite remarkable. when you see it on a large scale. Because of course it would never happen that way. Normally you'd have, so that this is the sort of patterning you develop, and that would be where, in this case, they would select a tree crop, and then those trees would get planted along that pattern. And then you have even spacing in your alleys. So that's one thing I think is great. So the access between trees is such that you can easily manage it. That's another. It's hard to know. We don't have the context of any of these. We're just kind of dropping in. A lot of people share their stuff here. There's another one. So it's pretty interesting. It's quite fascinating, I find anyhow. So hopefully that doesn't confuse things, but when you get into agricultural design, it's such a huge rabbit hole, right? I've been on the Agrarian platform training here for 3 years, and I'm just scratching the surface, really. So I'm probably not going to remain as a planner member, and that's what when you're a planner member, you get to take the online training, and there's 2 per year. There's another one coming up, so that might be the last one I do. I don't know, but it's quite remarkable. I don't know why I'm drawn so heavily to the agricultural end, but I just go with that. And so yeah, anytime I see agricultural properties, it's quite fun. Yeah, so I hope that was helpful, Max. The other
Yeah, that's
thing,
great.
oh, there was one other thing here that I was going to show
Wait,
you just with the Google Earth. Yeah, it was this space here. I mean, that's obviously a lot smaller. There is some opportunity there for your client to do something or yourself. Um,
yeah, an interesting little problem to be solved in that space is, in theory, it's a great little paddock for grazing or a series of paddocks, but the previous owners or some of them planted loads and loads and loads of daffodils, which have,
hmm,
which look beautiful, but are grazer toxic.
hmm,
Um, and so it's kind of limited our use. And so we're having to mow there a lot more than we'd like, and not able to, really make use of the space. Um,
interesting.
yeah,
You could just, you know, you, I mean, what came to mind initially for me was just, of doing a little annual veg for the family there. That could, mind you, if you've got that going on already, then,
yeah,
there's,
I, would love the idea of making that space more productive. At this point, I think a big limiting factor is just, you know, space
exist.
and engaged labor and how many people are there doing the work, because there is a
Yeah,
really beautiful, cute little herb bed right on the south side of the main house there, which, hasn't really been maintained for years beyond very occasional weeding. And
sure.
yeah, so at this point, nobody's really prepared to buy more labor for ourselves.
Yeah, you could consider even silage tarp here, right? So get some, wait for soil moisture to be high. So say February, and tarp this off. And then by the time June rolls around, you probably don't have daffodils to worry about. And then you have a blank slate you can do whatever you want with, either reseed it, if you want to put animals on it or, um,
Yeah, I love that idea. And we have got a few 100 feet of silage tarp, so perfect.
yeah, that's one way of dealing with. I mean, we're having to, I know just with my property here, we're having to do a fair bit of light suppression with tarping this year on things that gotten away on us that we don't want. And it's a lot less disturbance just to wipe something out by with suppressing the light versus trying to cultivate it out of there. Um, so yeah, it's better for the soil. Emily had a comment here. She said, "Host a free community pick your own flower." Yes, perennial food forest. Yeah, that's a good idea too. You could do all sorts of things there. Um, I like the food forest idea. I also like the idea of just more perennial veg, and that does kind of fall into the whole food forest concept. Um,
Yeah, I love the idea of planting any kind of productive perennial stuff, especially woody stuff that in the future can get above grazing height
mhm.
right there. And I think that area is so close to the house and like visible from the road, and has so much, it's one of the first things you see. I think this winter we might experiment with doing a couple of like woven willow arch kind of things, or either around the south end of that little herb garden or more towards the little moat. And yeah, eventually I'd love to get lots of woody, nice stuff in there.
Yeah. Well, I know one of a friend that's got an organic farm not too far from us, about an hour away. She's a really good grower and always has the first peas out and the first of everything. Quite amazing. She's always managing to be first at the market with a lot of products, and she ended up putting in a whole bunch of blueberries, which where I live, they're kind of an overplanted item. But then she switched and started putting in things like black currants and red currants and elderberry. And, she was going after a sort of a niche market. And unfortunately, during that heat dome, that was really a negative impact on her black currants. They didn't, some of them got scorched. But that given the soil moisture in this area, that may be something to consider. Some of these moisture loving um, shrubs that even elderberry, there's a huge market for elderberry fruit. And yeah, it's a question of finding the niche that's not being filled and, just selecting a crop that would work really well. Christy has a comment here. Woof, yeah, pre-labor. Yes. So you can get woofers in. Um, I've seen mixed results with farms that bring in woofers. In some instances, they're excellent. You get really high quality people that are traveling and want to gain great experience, and others that are sort of less enthusiastic. But that's probably a lot to do context specific. So if there's somewhere that's pretty cool, it'd be obviously a lot more fun. But yeah, that's a good point, Christy. You can certainly get labor in a number of different ways, just have to house and feed people as well. But yeah, so I don't know. I hope that helped, Max. Do you have any other questions or anything that you want to?
Yeah, I mean it's super great and I appreciate it. I am one of the I'm curious your thoughts on access, which is really a big thing on this property. On the small scale here, because of all these fences and the gates are placed in weird positions, and it's all really kind of idiosyncratic, if not just stupid. Um, and then on the larger scale, so much of that area in the forest is like way too sloped. So much of the area, along the stream is, I guess, limited by access due to, you got to cross a stream somehow, and various other things. So anyway, just big picture, what your thoughts on access and potentially improving or
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Let's just go back to, so if we go back to the agrarian platform, which I'm forever promoting, it seems, um, you can see on the left here, they deal with 10 different layers when they're doing their farm planning. And it starts with climate, which, is essentially what we did with the course. We were climate in week one or lesson one. And then we go to geography, which is huge. And that's really, producing your base plan, but getting a lot more information on top of that. And then water is the next one, and then access. So you're dealing with your access even before your buildings, your fencing, or any crops or anything, so that these all flow into one another. So, and water being the in front of access. So it's a very, very different way of looking at land. And when you see, it's kind of harder when you're retrofitting an existing farm, um, and a smaller farm, right? It's much like an urban permaculture design versus acreage. It's a lot harder when you get into smaller spaces. So if you were looking at, let's go back to, oh, okay, Emily, I got your note here. If we go back to, say, a map of your property or your project site here, um, it looks like there's great access with all the structures. It's just getting beyond that, hey? So,
well, yeah, and a big issue that we're running into is just efficiency moving between the structures. And this like it's difficult to see on a map of this scale, but for instance, the market garden area, if you want to access that area with a tractor, which in theory is the most efficient way of, moving compost, moving wood chip, whatever you're doing,
yeah.
you got to go all the way around the barn, curve back through. It's a tight corridor, tight turn. And then if you're on foot, a lot of the, tool storage, kind of the main thoroughfare, where we can get stuff delivered, where the trucks are comfortable dumping stuff, is there in front of the barn. And so, in terms of just wasted footsteps, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
moving about in between. And there are a couple of footpaths, but like directly between greenhouse and barn area. But, they're restricted by gates, and one of them runs right in front of somebody's like front door
Mm-hmm.
window, whatever. Um, and so, yeah, a lot of the limitations are just fence based in that core tight area.
Yeah, and that gets harder because as you look at this, you realize your access is established before your building. So that's opposite to what most people will do. And if you're having to work with what's existing, it's not going to be perfect. You're just going to have to try and make changes that are going to, work given the constraints of what's there. And again, it's not going to be perfect. And it may take quite a bit of time to sort that out, you know, and cost is a big part because access is not cheap. Building roads, making areas, dump areas, it's not cheap. And so you want to do a good job with that. But there may be some simple solutions for you. It's just a question of, you know, getting more detail what's there and seeing what you can do with some of the things you've described. So if you have a market garden, like that's the one thing that jumps out at me. Maybe we can get a better map here. Here, I'll just switch over. I know we're going over time here a little, but we'll try and. So if you have a market garden here, you definitely want good access to that, right? And it looks like in your map that that may not be the case. So getting materials even to compost, etc., for that may be a little tricky. So there may be, you know, some um, there may be. It looks like there might be a little bit of an access there, um, but there may be a good, good case in point. We're having a road, a little bit of access coming in here for trucks, whether that's picking up um, harvested crops or for dumping. I mean, there's also, processing. I don't know where they would process their market garden, um, what they're pulling out of there, but that's a huge time. That my understanding is 20 or 30% of the total time is actually processing what you grow. So they probably want to consider a little building to do that in, and then you'd want good access for that. So maybe running a little road here might be beneficial. It's hard to say without being on the ground, but it looks like somebody's been running a tractor or something through here
No,
at some point.
you're doing great, and you're pretty much in line with where we've landed. That little strip that you're tracing is actually a fence line, and that little paddock down below was a chicken run for a long time. It was a little chicken paddock, and they've since been cycled out of there and are on pasture. But yeah, that we've been kind of looking at where to breach the fence line right about
Hmm.
where you were tracing to be able to make enough space to pull trucks in there.
Yeah.
So great. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean that's great. That's super affirming.
Right on. Well, and that's just taking a look at it without not a whole lot of knowledge of the site. But well, I hope that helps you out, Max.
That's great. Thank you so much.
We do have a question here. It's from Emily. All right. So Emily asks, if I was to put a rain garden in the front yard, could it possibly destabilize the root system of a giant sequoia? Well, let's take uh, hold on here. We'll just open this up. My initial answer would be no, it won't destabilize it. So where were you thinking, Emily? Was it out front here?
Yeah, that's a spot.
And then that's the large.
Hmm. And there's a bit of a slope
Mm-hmm.
where those two random blue arrows are. There's
Oh
a
yeah.
small hill that's not shown that goes directly east. That's not shown on the.
Okay. Um, no, you might find it actually enhances the tree. Now, the caveat to that is when you dig that rain garden, let's say you're excavating the rain garden, you'd have to be mindful of tree roots. Um, and sort of dance around that a little bit, because whenever I look at a tree, um, you look at the mass of it above ground, there's probably an equal mass below ground. So you want to be, mindful of how that is going to go. But I could only see the rain garden assisting it. I don't think it would destabilize. Now, if it was a plant that wanted dry conditions and you were sticking a rain garden next to it, yeah, then I can see it being not a great idea. Um, and it would also depend on how much of this roof surface you're sending into that. Is it like half of the front here? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, those little, like, I don't know how you describe those triangles. Uh, to the right of that long rectangle area, that also filters to the northwest. So of the thick line, that whole section, including to the right where you just went, those little,
Including to the right a bit?
yeah,
So
that
go
all,
over,
yeah.
okay. So what I would do is I would just make sure that your rain garden is at least, the base of it is at least 10% of this area. Um, and I'm not sure if oh, but there's an excellent, I would check this publication out. I don't know if I have, get rid of my lines here. But do check this out. You can just Google it, the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington. Fabulous resource. It really is. It's probably one of the best free resources I've seen out there for rain gardens. And there's a lot of info just on the basic concept, how to construct it. This is an interesting part too, where you got to size it. And it's based on, in Western Washington, these regions, and some ponding height, some very, good info. But you can see a lot of them, and even in some eh, instances, they want it to be 28% of the roof area. So you do want to be mindful of that. 10% is kind of a minimum. And what'll happen is if it's too small, it'll just fill up very quickly and then start to go into overflow. So that is, that's the worst thing that could happen. But yeah, and then of course, one of the really good parts of this booklet is at the end here where they get into the different zones, because there's 3 distinct zones in a rain garden, and then all the different plants that can work within that. That's a tricky one all in itself. So let's see here. So yeah, zone 1 is the bottom, zone 2 is up on the edge, and zone 3 is the very top. So they're very, very different habitat, little microclimates. So yeah, but this is definitely worth checking out. So yeah, you might just want to be careful you have enough space. And ideally, well, as you can see with the publication here, if we look at a rain garden's got to be flat, right? So if you're on a slope, that means you have to retain one side. So you want to factor that in too, whether they probably get into what the maximum slope is on this. I'm trying to remember what it is. I think it's once you get above 10% slope, you got to be a little bit mindful. But this is really worth checking out. It's again, gives you a lot of details and highly recommend it. It helped me with the first one I ever did. So
Yeah, that's a really great resource.
yeah. Yes, and it's a good question how it's going to impact existing plants and um, providing you're not going into that root zone, I think it'd be just fine. But if you end up having to excavate into that, because ideally with a rain garden, you're over excavating and then backfilling with soil. So if you indeed want 6 to 12 inches of ponding height, then you have to add in your topsoil depth to figure out how deep this is going to be in its initial excavation. Um, so there's a little bit of consideration with it. You may get lucky and that's just beautiful soil and you don't have to import any, but certainly where I live, we have very thin soils, and once you start going down below a few inches, you're into a subsoil that's not going to support the plants that you want. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
um we had a old Douglas fir just to the right of the sequoia that was cut down
Oh,
years.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
since then we've had um false morels growing in the front yard, which is pretty cool. So I know that there's some good decay happening below ground, but I've also tried
Hmm.
to dig a hole in that front yard near the front porch, and it's so rooty. But that seems to be the only place that a rain garden would make sense.
Yeah, it's worth trying out. And you may find, I know I've had one client with a sequoia in their front, and they ended up taking it out. Um, it ended up causing a lot of issues with sidewalks and the hard surface around the area. And they were quite concerned that, you know, it's really not an appropriate tree to have in an urban area, but, you know, I'm not saying you should take it out. Just be cautious long term that, it may start to rear its head a little bit.
Yeah, it's probably like at least 50 feet tall at this point. It's been there
Yeah, and
since I was a kid, at least
that's a
30
baby,
years.
hey?
Yeah,
So
it'll get.
you might have a hard time getting 10% surface area here, but you can certainly play with that just by measuring your roof area and then on Google Earth, that's one good thing about Google Earth, you can make a little polygon and see whether that represents 10% of this, right? So, yeah.
Cool, thank you.
So hopefully that helps you out. All
Yeah,
right.
that's an amazing thing to have that rain garden handbook, like just tailored for the Puget Sound. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's a great handbook. It very, very helpful. Um, so yeah, it's helped me out a few times. Okay. Well, I guess we've gone over time for sure. And thanks, Emily, for pointing out that you did pop that in the questions. Does anybody have any questions they want to throw out before we sort of wrap up our meeting today? Everyone feeling fairly confident going into the final part of the assignment here? Okay. Right on. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your time today and your participation in the course. And I really look forward to seeing your final assignments next week. What will probably happen is I'll grade them over a few days. So if you can get them in Monday, that's great, but it'll probably take a couple of days to go through all of them and provide you with some good feedback. So All right. So if you do run into any trouble, don't hesitate to drop me a note in between then. And thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll see you later.